Welcome to the Tory Burch Foundation Business Webinar Program presented by Bank of America. Today's session is Speak Out Thought Leadership, and we are going to learn how to build influence, set yourself apart in ways that are unique to you, and position yourself for growth and new business opportunities. I'm Molly Heffernan, Vice President of Marketing for the Tory Burch Foundation, and I am just beyond excited to be here with a speaker that is absolutely outstanding. She is a storyteller, a founder, a Tory Burch Fellow, and just such a treasured member of our community. So everyone, let's give a warm welcome in the chat for Lindsay Rogers, who is here. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, everybody. It's so excited to be here. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to get started.
Yes. Lindsay founded Raw Strategy to help people like you transform the world around them. And Lindsay specializes in delivering thought leadership and personal brand programming. Her clients include NBC, Team USA, North Face, and so many more incredible brands and people. And needless to say, we are just in fantastic hands with Lindsay today. After Lindsay's presentation, we are going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So please use the Q&A box for all your questions. We're going to do our best to get to as many as we can, and use the chat for that community, that fun, connecting with one another. It's going to be a great session. Today's session will be recorded, so watch your inboxes for the replay link. And with that, I'm going to hand it to you, Lindsay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to get started. So I love that everyone is from all over the country. It's so exciting. It's as a Tory Burch Fellow alumni, we were also from all over the country, and it was so exciting to kind of share all the things that we experience as entrepreneurs together. So I'm thrilled to be here. So I thought I would start. I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see me, and you'll see my presentation. So you'll see both of us at the same time. And what I wanted to share at the beginning was that and as Molly said, this webinar will be about 45 minutes. We'll have some Q&A at the end. What I would love to see is put questions in the chat as they come up. If anything pops up, we want to create that sense of community and conversation. So pop it in, no matter what comes up. I think if you have that thought or you have that question, other people will be too. And it really helps kind of foster that sense of, me too, I have that also. Thank you for articulating that struggle or that challenge that I have. That's what creates that sense of community. And that's what was so important for me as a Tory Burch Fellow. So as I said, this will be recorded. And so if you need to hop off, that's totally fine. So I wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about who I am. So I'll share this, is that I started out as a ski racer growing up, and I was on the US ski team, and I had a huge injury that totally changed my trajectory. But I always had this deep sense of curiosity in people. And after I retired from ski racing, I turned that deep sense of curiosity into a career in journalism. And in that career in journalism, I covered really wild human stories across the globe for big titles like Outside Magazine and National Geographic and MSNBC and all these really fascinating places. And I got to know people, and I got to know what resonated with people. So after years of telling their stories and really getting into the nuts and bolts of what resonated with people and an audience, I started figuring out, how can I start to work with brands, with leaders, and with athletes on how to use that sense of storytelling and the impact of storytelling to build that trust, reputation equity, and that impact. Right? And it also creates that sense of resiliency as an entrepreneur, because what you share and how you share it can really have a dramatic impact on the direction of your company and how people receive the information that you're sharing, whether that's a CPG brand or you're a service-based company, anything. So what we do at Raw Strategy is we help you as a leader, or I work with a lot of athletes as well, you as a leader revolutionize how you sort of inspire and transform the world around you through high impact thought leadership and personal brand programs. So we're one-on-one with individuals, groups, conduct workshops, etc. But what I really want you to know is that I'm here because I genuinely believe that your story matters. especially as an entrepreneur, you go through so much and you go through so many challenges and heartaches and hope and resilience and fear and all of those things. And that's what creates that sense of connection with other people. So as we start to look at what creates a thought leader, I want you to think about there's an element of vulnerability that goes along with being a thought leader, because it's really sharing a deep sense of who you are, what you know, and what you've been through. Okay, so I'm going to start with a quick story, because that's what I do. Not about me, but a guy named Joe. So Joe was this really brilliant young economist, and he had all the credentials you could possibly imagine, all the, the pedigree from the most amazing schools, etc. So he was this brilliant guy, but in his world of like all these other economists, he realized that he was in a really crowded field of people vying for the same level of credibility as him. So he quickly realized that that brilliance alone wasn't really enough to move the needle for him or set him apart, because everyone in that field is sort of annoyingly good with numbers, right? So his credentials looked alarmingly like everyone else's. So his question to himself was like, oh man, how am I going to get any daylight on the ideas that I have when I'm surrounded by people with amazing ideas? So one night, this guy, Joe, found himself at a dinner with all these bigwigs in economics. And amongst the small talk, he started to share a story about his experience growing up in this super tiny little town called Gary, Indiana. And I don't know if anyone's from the Midwest or from Indiana, but if you are, shout out. There are an amazing number of very, very smart people out of Indiana, or Gary, Indiana, excuse me. So raise your hand if you're from anywhere near there. But this guy talked about the kind of economic struggles of his community and the factory closures and how these events really shaped his understanding of economic inequality and the importance of what he does and why he does it. And as he started speaking in this group of people, the room slowly started to kind of fall silent, right? People started to lean in because they were captivated not just by his expertise, but by that authenticity and emotional resonance of his story. It really mattered to people, right? So that night, Joe realized that he gained something far more valuable than recognition for his intellect, which he was placing more value on, but he earned the trust and respect of the people that mattered most, his peers, right? They saw him not just as this brilliant economist, but as this passionate guy, this advocate for stability and prosperity and all these things he was trying to push through in his data, right? So it totally changed people's perception of him when he started to share why, what mattered to him, what has he been through that actually shaped the reason why he does what he does, okay? So this guy, it turns out, is this guy, Joseph Stiglitz. He's a Nobel laureate. And fun fact, there are like 2 or 3 Nobel laureates from Gary, Indiana, which is absolutely amazing. But his ability to weave that personal narrative into his expertise really enhanced his personal brand, but it also kind of revolutionized his ability to influence people, right? So I want you to think about, okay, what does Joe have to do with me? So what Joe has to do with you is this. So regardless of whether you're a CPG brand or a service-based company, we all face the challenge of how do we get people to notice us? How do we attract people? How do we get them to trust us? How do we get people to kind of like us enough to actually purchase something from us or do something we want them to do? So at the heart of what we all do as entrepreneurs is the art of influence, right? We have to influence people and kind of convince them to see the world through our lens, to trust our insights, to trust our recommendations that this product is the best and you need it, right? So when you develop that sense of thought leadership and develop that sense of, this is who I am and how I want to present myself, you develop more ways to effectively communicate your ideas, connect on a really personal level, and inspire that confidence and action in the people you're trying to connect with, okay? So today, here's what I want you to do. I want to challenge you to think about your narrative, and I want you to think about how we are going to present your narrative and your experience in such a way that gets people to think differently about who you are and what you're presenting as an offer to them, right? As a, a brand and a product-based company or an actual service, right? So we're going to do this in 3 ways. So number 1, we're going to talk about identity and perception. How do you perceive yourself? But also, how do you want other people to perceive you, so we can start to build that narrative and build that reputation equity in a way that you feel like you have control over it, right? The second thing is once we make those decisions, we say, okay, how are we going to get that out there, right? And this is what we call impactful messaging. And this is sort of the really, really important pillar of thought leadership. And what does that take? How am I going to encourage people to think differently about the thing I do to set myself apart, right? And then the third thing is tactics. And we all love ourselves some tactics, right? Like, how are we going to actually do this? After making those initial decisions, what are we going to do to get it out there? Okay, so that's what we're going to do today. Okay, excuse me. So there's an idea that I want to introduce you to as we get started. So this idea is a concept that I learned from a guy, Arthur C. Brooks. I don't know, you can raise your hand or say, yes, I know who this guy is. If anyone has ever read anything or heard anything from Arthur C. Brooks, I'm a big fan. But he talks about this idea that there are 2 forms of intelligence. There's this idea of fluid intelligence as well as crystallized intelligence. And what he means is that you, as a leader of a company, as an entrepreneur, or potentially a leader within a company, we are most likely in a stage of your career where you're moving from exclusively acquiring information and gathering, right? Where you're gathering ideas off shelves of other people, right? And we're moving into this idea of crystallizing your knowledge into what we would liken as wisdom, right? Because you, at this point in your lives and your career, you know a lot, right? Whether you're new to being an entrepreneur or you're 15 years in, you've garnered a lot of experience. You have a lot to share. Okay. So what happens when you start to look at how is my intelligence moving into wisdom is that you have this ability to start to do things like predict outcomes. You recognize patterns that others who don't have your experience don't see. You can solve problems quickly. You know which problems are even worth solving, right? And then you rely more and more on your ability as you get more experience. You rely more and more on your ability to synthesize that knowledge. And what that means is ultimately that experience, your experience, helps you become more professionally valuable to the teams around you, to potential partners, but also to people that you are trying to attract in as customers. We want to make you valuable. We want to make you a must-have for the people you're trying to connect with, right? This is what is called thought leadership. We want to make you valuable to the people you're trying to connect with. And here's why. Because people, and this is a hard truth, I'm sorry to break it to you, but people are questioning you constantly, okay? You're sort of guilty till proven innocent, if you will. And what happens is that your customers or potential customers, partners, new hires, etc., do a really good job of vetting the daylights out of you behind your back, right? They've scoured the dark and dusty corners of the internet, and they've formed about 95% of their opinion of you and your products by the time they actually come in contact with you, your product, or your service. So in effect, they've sort of written your story for you, right? Because they need questions answered. Questions like, can I trust you? Can you help me get what I want? Why should I believe you can do what you say? Who are you to tell me what to do and how to do it, right? And the big one, which I totally love, is, do I even like you? Do I even like your product? Do I even like your packaging? Do I even like what you're saying online? So it becomes really, really important to showcase those answers strategically so that you can gain control over the narrative that those people are saying about you. Let's be real, behind your back, right? You don't know what a lot of people are saying about you, but we want to give them what they should think. Okay, so that is ultimately what creating a personal brand and what creating thought leadership is all about, is we want to kind of start to shape what other people think about you in so much as we can, right? So what happens is that people are really savvy right now, right? They've got the internet, they've got access, basically unfettered access to information on you, your background, your people who work for you, what your brand mission is, et cetera. So it becomes really critical to be intentional in your company, both internally, but also externally, so that you can gain that influence you need to get the job done, to sell the product, to sell your service, right? And in the absence of that strategic and thoughtful messaging, your ability to influence people and what decisions they're making, what they think about you, really declines. So I'll give you a really quick example, but one client I work with was, she worked at an insurance company, and she was moving between these two insurance companies, very, very much a top level leader at an insurance company. And she was being vetted by a lot of top firms in the country, okay? At the same time, she was competing for a position against about 5 other women. But because she and I had worked on developing that strong point of view on how female leaders in finance have the ability to impact companies and younger women, and she had this really strong sense of what she stood for, she got an incredibly high offer from a company, and she won out over several other potential recruits. And I'll give you some data to back this up. Because what happens is when people start to see how you think and why, they start to become advocates for you, right? And you'll get shot to the top of the pile, whether you're competing again against a CPG brand, or you have competitors on the service-based side of things. You want to sort of think about, how am I differentiating myself? And how you think and putting thought leadership content out there is one of the key ways we can do that, because digital is where people look and vet you, right? So here's why that works so well with the women I worked with. The example I just gave is that people really want 2 things from you, okay? They want humanity and they want creativity. And to be totally frank, I sort of stole that from Seth Godin, who I'm a huge, huge fan of. But he talks about this idea that when you really think about it, that level of humanity and kind of that personal feeling of understanding why someone started a company, what's behind them, how do they get around those challenges, et cetera, is really what connects people to who you are. Because real value today is sort of measured differently, right? It's measured in the interactions you have with your customers and with your teammates, your creative solutions to problems, and your resilience, right? Entrepreneurs know everything there is to know about resilience, because it takes a heck of a lot of resilience to stay in the game. People want to know about that. How did you get here? How did you stay here, right? And it might take a little bit of, emotional labor to showcase those things, but the alternative is that you fade into what people call a sea of sameness with everyone else, right? So I want you to think about, what do people need to know about you to establish that story in their heads that makes it so painfully obvious why they'd pick you, okay? So I want you to write in the comments real quick. I know that the comments are active and we're monitoring them. So I want you to write in the comments right now, what people need to know about you that they may not know now. What do they need to know to establish that story in their heads to make them trust you? Was there an experience you had that showcases your depth of insight or wisdom? How did that inform the process that you created or the product that you created that got you a better outcome, that made you feel better? Maybe it's a vegan brand that, oh my gosh, I wasn't, I was eating dairy products and I had no idea that I was feeling so bad, so I created this other thing, right? How did you get around that challenge? What informed that process? Can you share that? Okay, so I'd love to just see people kind of hop in the chat and share that with each other. So I think it's a really important piece. So when we see our story and when we see our experience in this way, we start to look at it as, wow, I had an experience, it caused an emotion in me, that created an action that I had to take because of that experience and that challenge that I had that got me a better outcome, right? That's what we want to share. That process is what we want to share. That's called thought leadership. Okay, so I want to ask a couple questions. So type your answers in the chat here. I'd love to see them. So number 1 is, when it comes to influencing customers, potential partners, teammates, what is your biggest challenge? What is the biggest challenge that you have right now? And type them in the chat. I'd love to see. So that's the first question I have, is what is your biggest challenge when it comes to kind of building that level of influence with decision makers, partners, et cetera? Okay, that's number 1. The second question is, and this is a really important one, is, and you can jot this down and really think about it offline at another time, or feel free to jot down in the chat. What am I saying that's not being heard? right? What am I saying that's not being heard, that I'm trying to get across? I'm trying to get this idea across. I'm trying to get this product across. People aren't really resonating. What is that thing? And then we're going to talk about how we splice that up so that people actually hear it and resonate with it. Okay. Okay. So one of the biggest questions I get is, just to go backwards a little bit, is what the heck is thought leadership? And it's a term that's thrown around quite a bit. And so I want you to think about thought leadership as there's, one definition might be your finest thinking strategically used to develop brand equity, drive demand, strengthen customer connections, and create new sales and collaboration possibilities. What I say that's a fancy definition. The simple definition is sharing cool stuff that makes you interesting to other people, that creates that magnet towards you, that creates that boomerang effect, right? Where people say, that was interesting what Desiree said, what Molly said, right? I'm going to come back because what they said was so interesting. It made me think slightly differently about a certain thing. That is thought leadership. Okay. So we want to cement you in your position as a leader by sharing those insights, those perspectives, helpful information, etc., targeted at the right people to actually make a difference in their lives. And what people make the mistake of doing is they start to think about, and I'm a thought leader, I'm just going to throw out all the information that I have learned without connecting to the people that they're actually wanting to impact. So one of the things I do when I work with people kind of in groups and one-on-one is we work heavily on audience. And I don't have time to go into all that today, but we work on the psychographics of the audience. What matters to the people you're trying to connect with? And how can you take your experience to actually change their lives? And I'm not talking, you don't have to dramatically change their lives, but how do you shift the way they see things? How do you shift the way they adopt an idea, a product, something? That ultimately is what thought leadership is, shifting the way people think about something. Okay. So some common characteristics of a thought leader and how we kind of define them. And from the most basic standpoint, it's basically a person who has a desire to share their wisdom, right? So to be a really true thought leader, we're looking for 5 really essential characteristics. So number 1 is you have a strong opinion about a certain thing or a set of things, right? You point out things that were previously overlooked in thinking, strategizing, creating. Maybe it's a food product. Maybe it's an actual service that you really wanted for yourself, but no one was creating it, so you created it. But you have a strong opinion, and that is key, because one thing that happens is that people go out and they want to appease their audience, and so they come out as very generalized or kind of ambiguous. And ambiguous can actually push people away, right? So you want to have an opinion on why you created something. If there's a differentiation between you and why you created your product, or you think not necessarily about a specific competitor, but about your industry, share that. Okay. The second thing is experience, right? This person, this thought leader, shares mistakes, corrections, processes, how to win or avoid loss, etc. Okay. Number 3 is knowledge. So you have kind of guidance for people on how to respond to issues that come up. So as an entrepreneur, issues come up daily, hourly, by the minute, right? How have you gotten around them? How have you dealt with them? That's knowledge, that's insight, that's wisdom. How do you share that as guidance for other people, right? Number 4, there's a level of transparency, right? So you have the desire to kind of unveil these formerly, what I say, inconspicuous nuances, challenges, whatever of the industry. Okay. You are transparent about those things. You're not afraid to share the kind of inside, like pull the curtain back, share a little bit more about that kind of inside experience, right? And then the last one is the most important one. Circle, the ability to think outside the box. So you, as this thought leader, explore these potential challenges or new opportunities that were not considered until you showed up. And I know this sounds like a tall order, but there's a reason why you're entrepreneurs. There's a reason why you're not kind of stuck in the day-to-day of working for other people, right? And even if you are working for an organization and inside, it's okay to say, I think outside the box in this way, and I want to explore those new opportunities, and I want to kind of share my insight in a particular way. So I have clients who work within an organization who've created email newsletters for their team, weekly, monthly, where they're sharing that insight of how am I thinking outside the box, just to kind of stir up some intrigue for people, that level of curiosity, and like, she thinks differently about this thing. That is so cool. I'm going to come back to her for more valuable insight. Okay. So again, all of these things create that level of a boomerang effect. I'm going to come back to her. That's so interesting. Okay. So, one of the things I talk about is like, why do you want to become a thought leader? So if you haven't already told, I'm very, if you can't tell already, I'm very passionate about this, because it creates and reinforces awareness for who you are, what you do, and why you exist, right? That's really, really important, because especially now, there's so much data to support new audiences, younger demographics really need to be on board with your why as a brand, as a company. They really need to understand who you are underneath the surface to really become an advocate for you, okay? And so being a thought leader also showcases those unique perspectives and experience, and helps the audience, the potential partners, team members, et cetera, understand why you versus your competitor. Why should I care, right? That really allows you to kind of showcase that for other people. Number 3 is, again, it helps those different audiences that you have, your team members, your partners, really stay plugged into your expertise, and gives you an opportunity to reinforce your value over and over again, right? Because they're vetting you every time they go to make a decision. Should I buy your product? Should I buy your service? You need to kind of reinforce your value, okay? So it allows you to kind of build that level of credibility ongoing, and helps you become recognized as someone to really follow and trust, okay? And here's why. People are looking for you to create an unusual arrangement of ideas to spark their interest. This is really important. And sorry, I absolutely love this picture. So I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone. Sex, drugs, and bacon rolls. I'm sorry, but I love that so much, because it is a slightly unusual take on something that you know as sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? So just a slight tweak on something is like, oh, that's cool, that's fun. That piques my interest. And the way our brains work as human beings is if the information is new, it causes us to pay attention. Okay. So there's a few different decisions we need to make to start becoming a thought leader. So number 1, and we're going to get into a few different kind of tactics shortly. So number 1, we have to get to know ourselves in this context. We have to ask ourselves 2 questions. Number 1, a lightweight question for what are we, Wednesday, midday? Who are you? And how do you want to be perceived? So the first step in figuring out what your identities are out in the public space is asking these questions, because those identities will really help distinguish you, and they're the reason people will connect with you. So finding those kind of common shared identities between you and your audience, you and your customers, will really help you resonate with them. There's a few different rules of identities. So number 1, that some of our identities are consistent over the course of our lives, but generally speaking, identities commonly and frequently shift. So if you want to type in the chat, what are some identities that you want other people to know about you? And there's some questions I'm going to have you screenshot in a second. But are there, things where you've gained some skills or interests or insights or experiences, and that's what you want people to know? So identities change, they're negotiable and they're flexible, okay? Second thing is some identities are labels that other people put on us, okay? And this is really important. I want you guys to think about this. So there's what I call a danger of a single story. So the danger of a single story is this. If people only know you as one thing, like I'm, just a CPG brand, I'm just a PR girl, I'm just a sunglasses company, I want to tell you right here, no, you're not. You are not one thing, because when you present yourself and your brand and your company as one thing, people bring all of their perspectives and experience with that one thing and place them on you. Therefore, they own your narrative, they own your identity, and that's based upon their own experience with that thing. Okay. What we want to do is look at how do we present a 360-degree view of you, of your brand, where we look at all these different identities that are unique to you. And they can be crazy and wild, and they can be about your values. They can be about, you as an athlete growing up. It can be, you're a dog lover, a yogini, Indian food lover, whatever it is. We want to make sure those are very, very unique to you so that people are not owning your narrative for you. Okay. The last thing about identity is that you have to make decisions around public versus private identities, right? I am not of the camp who says you have to put all of your life out there. Absolutely not. I think there should be a boundary between what you share publicly and what you should share privately. So make that decision up front so you don't feel like you're ever in a position where you're like, ugh, I shared too much. Oh, that feels so uncomfortable. I can't believe I did that. I got to go take it down. Or I'm not comfortable sharing something about my kids. That's a common one. Make those decisions up front. Some people are very comfortable sharing about their kids or their, some really big hardship or some health challenge. Some people are not. It's a very personal decision. Make that decision up front. Okay. So here are some questions I want you to ask about yourself. And what I would do is take a screenshot of this. You can also answer some of these questions in the chat. I love seeing people's answers to these, but these are really, really important to kind of nail down what I call your circle of significance, meaning how are you going to become significant to other people and build that reputation equity? So number one, fill in the blank and say, it's important to me, it is important for me to be perceived as what, who, what are the characteristics, right? Number two, what have you learned and what wisdom can you share? What I say, and there's a hint in here, obstacles present decisions. Those are pivotal moments that reveal a piece of your character. What did you learn in those moments and how can you share that? I want to know that. That is really, really important for people to know, to get behind you, to become your advocate, to trust you, to build rapport, right? What do you want to be known for is number three. So what impact do you want to have and on whom? What are those people experiencing that you want to shape and help, right? And what can you share to reinforce that perception? Whoops, I miss, there's 2 3s in here. So number 4, what do you want people to know, think, feel, or do? Okay. What's the story you want people telling themselves about you when you're not in the room? What should they expect when they do see you? Right? So make sure you are answering those questions in the most unique way you possibly can. Okay. And I just saw a few, it's important for me to be perceived as interested and interesting, having empathy, trustworthy, a change maker. I love these. They're so good. Those are, so I'm gonna pick on one thing. Number one, if you have something like trustworthy, I'm going to push you on that a little bit, because what I want you to think about is, what do most people want and how do I differentiate from that? So let's say it's, authentic or trustworthy or a word that most people want to be perceived as. How do you drill down on that even more and say, what about being trustworthy is something that I want people to know about? And how do I articulate my trustworthiness in a story, in an experience that I share? Because people take information in the form of story and they trust it a lot more than they do facts. So present it as an experience I had that taught me this, therefore I do this. That's going to resonate a lot more than just stating I am trustworthy. Okay. So there's a quip in the writing world, and I'm sure you all have heard this: show, don't tell, right? So show people how you have built that sense of trustworthiness. What's an experience you can share, right? Okay. So the second piece is where we can shift perspective. So this is very much focused on how we're going to separate you from everyone else. And this is absolutely vital. Okay. So again, take a screenshot of this and write these answers down in your quiet time, or if you have any, focused work time that's not answering emails and phone calls, really take some time to think about these, or you can jot down some things in the chat function as well. But ask yourself, what is repeated in my world, in my industry, in wherever you are as an entrepreneur? Maybe it's in your community. What is repeated in your world that people say constantly? And do you have a different perspective on that you can share? That's number one. And sometimes this is where I want you to feel comfortable stating your opinion, not that you need to be polarizing, black or white, blue or red, nothing like that. But I want you to think about, how am I going to get people to think critically about something in a new way, right? Number two, who are the leaders or most popular people in your space? What are they saying that might be outdated or less true now than it used to be? And if you want, feel free to email me. I have a list of kind of a 5-step process, and it was a little bit too much to share here, but a 5-step process you can take to share your perspective and shift perspective. That's very, very cool. So feel free to, we can send my email or reach out to me through my website or connect with me on LinkedIn, wherever it is. And I'll share that with you because it's an amazing kind of 5-step process. It'll really help you showcase this. Number three, what has worked for a long time? Are there tools, techniques, beliefs that have helped people thus far, but are not helping them now, in your opinion? Again, in your opinion, right? We need to hear your opinion because ultimately that is your signature. Your perspective on what you've been through is your signature. It's your fingerprint. It's what sets you apart. Your experience might mirror someone else's in a certain way, like you couldn't get funding for your company, or the food distributor or your co-packer did something bad to your products and they went out in the market and you had to recall. Those might look similar, but your opinion, your perspective is your signature, is what will set you apart. That is yours and yours alone. You own that. No one else does. It's very important to think about. Okay. I stole this from Brene Brown. Hopefully you guys like it too. But what has left you bruised but not destroyed? Meaning, what has left a mark? What have you been through that's really hard, but you have actually continued? You have figured out a way around it. What is that way? What is that process? Did you create a product because of it? Did you create a service because of it? What is that? What has left you bruised but not destroyed? Okay, so there's something or a few things I want you to think about in terms of how impactful this messaging is when you're sharing your opinion on this. So number one, I say kind of 4 truths about this level of impactful messaging or impact messaging. Number one is specificity is the key to showcasing what I would call mastery, right? So the only way to show that level of knowing and experience is to be specific in what you went through, what you know, what you feel, and what you've experienced. The only reason you can get this specific is because you've done this thing. You've done it a million times. Sometimes you were terrible at it. Sometimes you got better at it. Sometimes you had great success. Share that, right? Number 2 is deep connection and relatability come from an intimacy with your thoughts, feelings, mistakes, wins, losses. Intimacy. That is a word I want you to think about, because that deep connection with your audience, those potential customers, and your relatability happens when you get as close as you can to describing your thoughts, your feelings, mistakes, wins, pains, losses, all of those things. Because as I was saying a minute ago, most people stay generalized. And we've talked about how that level of ambiguity leaves so much room for your audience to interpret who you are and what you're doing. So when you describe something specifically, the subconscious goes, that's new. I better pay attention. Okay. Lastly, mastery of your craft allows you to see things inside of what you do that nobody else does. This is important. Because you have this endless amount of experience that no one else has, truly, you are the only one to go through what you're going through. That guarantees that you understand the level of pain, challenge, risk, all of those things in your own way. So that mastery of your craft allows you to share what happened inside your experience, right? Describe this to your audience, describe how you got around it, what you learned from it. That showcases your thought leadership. Okay. So in the last few minutes, I want to share a few things. We're kind of running out of time, but there's something that I want you to think about in terms of sharing your persona. There's some decisions I want you to make around who do I want to show up as, right? As a thought leader, you can show up as a myriad of different types of people, right? So number one, there is this idea of a visionary, right? So the visionary is a person who's more industry focused, and you are sort of a visionary who has a unique perspective on trends, industry predictions, commentary within your industry, within a CPG vertical, or you have a strong opinion on something, right? So that whole persona can be encapsulated into this idea of challenge me and I'll challenge you right back, right? So an example of this would be Sally Krawcheck, right? She's the CEO and co-founder of Ellevest. Has a very strong focus on women and goes after the gender wealth and pay gaps. But she really talks about that idea of like, I'm going to challenge these kind of industry norms. Okay. Okay. Back to this. Number 2, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. So feel free to take a screenshot of these. I also want you to type in the chat which one you resonate with the most, so you can show up as that person, as that thought leader. Okay. So number 2 is this guide persona, and that is more product focused, where you know everything there is to know about the product you use and love. You're the face of these things for your partners, for the customers that you have, right? You are the expert, and you produce more content that is related to FAQs, how-tos, and you demonstrate how things work, okay? So you essentially act as people's guide and teach them about how your industry or your product works, okay? So a quick example of this is Annie Jean-Baptiste. She works at Google. She's an author of a book that talks about, product inclusion in technology, in your products that inclusiveness in the products that you're creating, okay? Number 3 is this evangelist. So this person tends to be more personal brand focused. So you talk about tech trends and innovations, or maybe how you or the companies you work with give back, social programs, how you support or sponsor, different teammates within your organization. In effect, you inspire people to do good or to grow, okay? Quick example is Richard Branson. He's a classic evangelist, right? He's out there focusing on big philanthropic efforts, sharing what the Virgin family of brands are doing, et cetera, okay? There's a zillion examples. Number 4 is mentor. Okay, this is the last one where you're more people focused. In other words, you sort of act as like a member for your audience and offer advice or how to grow personally and professionally. And one example that I'm sure you're all aware of is Gary Vee, right? He is so many things. He shows up as many different personas, but one of the big ones is this kind of helpful mentor for people. Okay, so I want you to think about, you can screenshot this as we're kind of nearing the end here. Think about which one you would show up as, which one resonates with you the most. And then beneath that, write down what are the topics that you would talk about underneath that umbrella, right? So write down 3 topics right now in the chat, or write them down on a piece of paper. And then think about, are there any partners that could also support these topics you're covering, right? Maybe there's brands, maybe there's some media that would support this, right? When people get a sense of what really matters to you, that also starts to catalyze that feeling of, she's a thought leader here, he's a thought leader here, right? I'm behind that person because they think this way, because they've helped me in this way, okay? So I can give you a zillion different examples on LinkedIn, and I have them. So I'm going to rifle through a couple of really quick things. But what I want you to think about is this. This is your litmus test. Anytime you go to share something that where you want to be seen as a thought leader, screenshot this or write it down. I want you to think about this. Number 1, does it showcase who you are? Number 2, does it showcase what you know or what you've experienced? Number 3, does it showcase how you do want to be perceived? Does it build that reputation equity? Number 4, does it show who you want to become? Not necessarily who you are today, who you were yesterday, but literally pushing you into that zone of thought leadership in the future, who you want to become. And number 5, is it something that can help other people? That is critical for sharing thought leadership. Does it help other people? How does it help them? Does it show them a new way to think about something, a new way to be, a new way to act? How do you help other people? Okay. So we have a lot of platforms to choose from when we do go to showcase these things. So you can screenshot this, but we all are very familiar with most of these platforms. So you have to make decisions on what those platforms are. From my perspective, the most important platforms are probably LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, if you want to go TikTok. But the one thing I'm gonna push you on is email. You own your email list. And I'm sure you've heard this a million times. Build your email list. Give people an opportunity to join your email list on your website, social, wherever it is, because you own that audience. And every time an algorithm changes on all of the social channels, you will lose something. You do not lose your audience on email. You own it 100% forever. And it becomes a one-on-one relationship. And there's far bigger open rates. So your relationship and your ability to build that reputation as a thought leader becomes a lot more powerful when you own your audience. Okay. That is my plug for email. And just really quickly, I am going to share this woman. So Alex Carter, I don't know if anyone's familiar with her. She's incredible. And she's, in my mind, she's one of the pinnacles of thought leadership right now, because she's this very intelligent woman who's doing really incredible things. She's a negotiation trainer for the UN. She's a law professor, but she really focuses on how you negotiate on your own behalf. Excuse me. And she is very influential in what she says, but she's also very vulnerable. And this is one example. She has many, many examples of showcasing an experience she had, but that also is her why and helps other people understand how they can take her information and benefit from it. So think about that. How can you showcase your thought leadership in a way that benefits other people? That creates that boomerang effect. Okay. Okay. I'm going to leave you with one last thought, and it is this. My challenge to you is that I want you to think about, how do you reveal the things the world cannot readily see by looking at your website, your product, your services that you offer? How can you reveal those experiences that you've had that are your signature, that are your fingerprint? Reveal the things the world that cannot see. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to just say, we're going to send out a free guide on how to kind of become a thought leader on LinkedIn, but you feel free to take a screenshot or take a picture of this code, because that will link to the free guide. So reach out. I absolutely love interacting with people online and on LinkedIn or Instagram, wherever it is. Join my email list. But I'm really looking forward to connecting with any and all of you that want to reach out. And yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah. So founders and everyone tuning in, we are going to be sending out Lindsay's information, links to the LinkedIn guide and everything after the session, along with the recording. But right now we're going to get into some Q&A, Lindsay, because there are a lot of questions.
Fabulous.
I want to start with one that is a very common theme. Many of you tuning in asked about the connection between thought leadership and networking. And so Lindsay, how does thought leadership connect into someone's networking strategy? And what are your recommendations when you're bridging the two concepts together?
Absolutely. That's a huge one. And I'm actually glad you brought it up, because it is something that people fear. Networking is hard, right? And people think, oh, the only way I'm going to network is by going into a physical space with a bunch of people and I'm going to have a glass of wine. It's really awkward. But what I want you to think about is, how do you network outside of that one-on-one, right? Where you're not pushed to be in that place that feels a little bit uncomfortable. How do you showcase that kind of vulnerability and insight first, so that people start to get to know you, how you work, how you think, how you've gotten around things? That's a really personal piece of your journey, right? But when people know that and they trust that, it's a level of like, I want to connect with her. That's fascinating. So it can really help jumpstart, even if it's like, let's say it's digital networking on LinkedIn, it can really jumpstart and open up the conversation, because one of the things I have this, when I work with people one-on-one, I have this list of like 7 ways to become interesting. And one of them is this idea of starting conversation, but also participating in conversations. And so networking comes in many, many forms. Right now, LinkedIn is actually really boosting comments, and comments is also a way that you can showcase the way you think. And that becomes a little mini community in the comments. That becomes a way to network. I mean, the number of people who have reached out to me and connected with me on LinkedIn based upon my comments, in the hundreds. And so think about that too, is like your networking strategy doesn't have to just be one-on-one. If it is, the other tip I will give is, and I'm happy to share this, Molly, with you, you can send it out in an email as well, is you want to be really clear on what your elevator pitch is. And can you have your elevator pitch in a networking scenario? Maybe it is in that more social environment, one-on-one, is can that elevator pitch include how you think about things differently in 3 sentences, right? Pick one moment that really mattered to you and showcase that in your kind of elevator pitch.
That's fantastic, Lindsay. And I think it brings up something that we saw in the chat when you were talking about the 4 personas. Many people said, I'm the visionary, I'm the guide. I'm also this. Can I be all 4? And I'd imagine that you have seen that many times with clients, that desire to be everything for everyone. But what is your advice for lasering in on the persona that is best suited for you?
Yes, and I do hear this all the time, that you don't have to be one. You're most likely going to be a fusion of 2, but it's like many things, you want to adopt one as the primary and one as the sort of, like in Enneagram terms, your wing, right? So one is sort of the one you really, really want to hone in on, because when people start to know you in that way, they start to trust you more and more. If you start bouncing between those personas, they don't really know where to put you. And it gets confusing for the people who it's your audience or your team members. They really want to trust, like, I can get that from you. I will trust that every time I come to you, I get that thing. So that level of consistency is huge. It's huge to show up in a similar way. And again, it can be 2, right? Absolutely. And most times, like when you're looking at a guide and a mentor, or a mentor and an evangelist, a mentor is someone who guides people. The evangelist is also inspiring. And so those 2 often go hand in hand. It can be very, very people focused. So absolutely, you can be 2, but I wouldn't try to be everything to everyone, because there's another quip in the marketing world. If you're trying to be everything to everyone, you're going to be nothing to no one. And so be specific on who you show up as, and then people will really resonate with that thing that you are actually delivering to them, that value you're giving to them.
I think that harkens back, Lindsay, to you teased about the importance of audience. And we absolutely could do an entire hour on audience alone.
Totally.
But if you could give everyone one sage piece of advice or one mistake to avoid in understanding their audience as they develop their persona, enter into networking situations, or writing that first LinkedIn post, what is that thing to hold true and forward in front of mind?
Okay. It's a great question. So the mistake people make is that they, like, I'll give an example. So about us pages on your website, typically people write this like long thing about them. And what I say is people want to know enough about you to understand how you can help them. And so that's similar in the sense of when you're going to post something, you don't want to make it just about you. You want to share enough about your experience to really showcase how it can help other people. Again, that's the difference between being a thought leader and being a content creator or an influencer, right? And I don't specifically love the term influencer just because I think it connects with, I have to be a Kim Kardashian, I have millions of followers to actually move the needle. I highly disagree with that. And I think I don't have an incredibly large audience. My roster of clients is full. And I think that the most important thing is to think about what matters to them. So I have these like crazy number of questions that I ask people to ask their audience when we're working together. But I think I would ask you a few questions. Number 1 is, what do they want more of, your audience? What do they want less of? And how can you help them get that?
So straightforward.
Yeah.
Easier said than done at times, but such an advice. And I think it also lends itself, you mentioned that you're a founder, you have a full book of clients, everyone on here, you're busy founders. It's a 24/7 job. How can you make time for thought leadership to be an organic piece of your day-to-day, of your business, when time is your most precious resource?
100%. So what I usually do, everyone's going to tell you to batch content, right? Maybe that'll work for some, where once a month you have 2 hours that you dedicate to creating a list of content. So while that works for some, what I like to do is kind of drip. Because I'm not going to spend 2, 3, 4, 5 hours because I just don't have that much creative capacity at one sitting. And so what I like to say is you can create a sense of Monday and Wednesday or 1 or 2 days a week, but really understanding what your capacity is. And then you say, okay, on Monday, I'm going to spend 5 minutes thinking about the idea, period. That's done. I'm not going to write a thing. On Wednesday, I'm going to just jot down a handful of notes of what I want to include. On Friday, I'm going to actually write the thing, and that's going to take 20 minutes because I already have the outline. And the following Monday, it gets posted. So I think that's one way to just like do it in bite-sized little pieces rather than putting this huge pressure on yourself to do what someone else is doing, like they're putting out content every day. That's very unrealistic for most people. As much as Gary Vee might tell you that, there's no way for most entrepreneurs to do that. So really understanding your capacity and really just breaking it up into really bite-sized little pieces. And those questions that I posted on the shifting your perspective, focus on those. If you don't focus on anything else, focus on, again, what is repeated in your world that you might have a different perspective on. All of those types of questions. The second bucket of things that you can really do is your how, your formula, right? Like, how are you doing what you do? Whether it's, your morning routine, which I don't have a specific morning routine, but people love to talk about morning routines, whether it's that, whether it is how you manage meetings, how you have gotten a co-packer, how you hire people, how you manage being a mother or a father and working parent. Anything is that showing your how also pulls back that curtain to give people that inside view, because people are voyeurs, right? People love seeing that stuff. And so if you can kind of pull back that curtain and be like, all right, people, this is real. And I'm gonna show you kind of what happens, but you're doing it in a way, like I always tell people to, and you've probably heard this, but share from your scars, not your wounds, meaning you share about an experience you had where you have enough distance from it, where you have perspective. You have that, this is what that meant. This is why, this is what I learned. When you share from the wound and you're in it, it gets a little bit sticky, right? And it doesn't necessarily push you into a thought leadership zone. It pushes you into that, like, I'm going to share everything as an influencer zone. And I think as a business owner, it's really important to distinguish those two. So focusing on sharing from your scars, not your wounds, and breaking it up into kind of bite-sized, palatable pieces that work for you, not for everyone else.
Lindsay, I think that's a fantastic way to leave us today. And I must say, we're just so grateful for your expertise that you, as a Tory Burch Fellow, are lending a hand back and supporting other members of our community. So thank you.